Right then. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Thriving Dentist Expert Panel. Tonight's topic, drop a PPO without losing a patient. We're going to talk about exactly what that means, what it takes to step away from a PPO without losing the patient. Who built your practice for? We're going to dive into the real math, real scripts, and of course, real 6 month numbers from people who have walked this road and how to do it sustainably. I'm your host for the session, Don Adisha, and yeah, it's going to be a fantastic evening. And before we get things started here, a few quick housekeeping notes. First, yes, we are recording, and you will receive a replay link after the session in your inbox so you can share with your colleagues and your partners. However, please do not let that make you passive. The real value is happening here live. So use the Q&A button for any questions you might have for the panelists, and use the chat for conversations, reactions, takeaways. I'll have my eyes on both the feeds, and if a question fits where the conversation leads, I may bring it in live or else during the thing session a bit more towards the end of the event. Right. Now, before we dive into the PPO conversation, I would like to frame one tension a lot of practices are feeling. More inquiries should turn into more booked appointments. But the booking gap often starts before the phone ever rings. So if your practice is attracting those price shoppers, insurance driven leads, or patients who just don't understand your value, it becomes much harder to move towards a healthier model. So that is why tonight's conversation is not only about dropping a plan, it's about replacing the wrong kind of patient flow with the right kind of trust. Echo Marketing, our sponsor for the event, helps dental practice owners build that trust through Google search visibility, AI search visibility, and local signals that turn interests into booked appointments. Equa has over 18 years of experience supporting dental practice owners and healthcare practices across the US and Canada. We will hear more from Equa a little later in the program. Right. So, to discuss this fantastic topic we have aligned for tonight, let's go ahead and meet our panelists. So, our first panelist is Eric Daw, Vice President of Business Development at Dental HQ. Eric helps independent practices and DSOs reduce reliance on insurance through sustainable, patient first membership plans. He has supported hundreds of practices in building more predictable, profitable systems that strengthen long term patient relationships. Eric, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And our second panelist is Maritza Duran, founder and CEO of M-Dent Consulting Services. Maritza brings more than 2 decades of experience inside dental practices, from dental assistant to regional manager to consultant. She helps emerging dentists launch and acquire practices, and she works closely with teams on operations, staff training, leadership, and patient communication. Maritza, we're really glad to have you here.
I am so excited to have this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Absolutely. Likewise. Right. Then let's get into the thick of it. My first question goes out to you, Eric. When a practice finally runs a carrier by carrier write-off report, what does that gap between billed fees and actual collections typically reveal?
Typically a huge discount. I think that we're all pretty familiar with it, 30 to 40% write-offs, sometimes higher. I recently, well, I won't name the carrier, but a few years back, there was even one carrier that sent out letters saying they were going to reduce reimbursements by 25%. I was just in a conversation in a state that I also won't mention, but the carrier there, the main carrier, was roughly half of what Medicaid was paying. So, some of these networks just they're not really worth being in. But cash patient write-offs are typically running, 5 to 8%. And what this report usually reveals is kind of the practice's true like reimbursement environment. What I mean by that is like, looking at, which PPOs are hurting your practice. So it could be a higher patient volume, but kind of a weak net revenue on that. You could see if maybe dropping that PPO improves profitability. Another thing to kind of look at with this report is seeing if, or maybe what the true value of your cash patients are, right? Or maybe it's kind of obvious to go fee for service, depending on what state, what area you're in, because you can get a higher collection per procedure. It could be faster payment, if they're slow to pay out. It could be a better EBITDA contribution. So you're also going to be able to see a couple other things, I guess, thinking about this, like, do you have leverage? So maybe you have one PPO that you kind of want to hold on to, but if it's low reimbursement, if it's low patient flow, you don't have a whole lot to lose, right? So this report might give you a little bit more confidence in negotiating with any given PPO. Um, and then there's also whether, maybe you're not ready to sell yet. Maybe you're not really looking at your practice valuation, but eventually you will, right? So there's implications here that buyers, they're going to care far more about like what's your collectible revenue? What does that kind of margin quality look like? What's the reimbursement mix? They don't really, I guess the top line production is not always the most important. And what I mean by that is like, let's say you have two practices, they're both doing 2 million in production, but you can have dramatically different values if one of them is collecting 96% of their fee schedule, another one's giving away, 35% in PPO adjustments, right? So uh, these types of reports, it's generally what's driving interest in things like membership plans or just kind of selective PPO participation. It could be getting into just more of a fee for service transition, I guess, and really just even patient retention strategy is the loaded answer there. But simple answers typically revealing a shockingly high write-off. So
Shockingly high write-off. And I appreciate that
yeah,
example there. 2 million in revenue, two practices, but the profitability can vary heavily. Uh,
very much.
Maritza, when
Yes.
a front desk team has no script ready and a patient calls to ask why their plan was dropped, who bears the cost of that gap first?
Well, the patient usually feels the first cost impact, right? But without a clear strategy and plan, it is the practice that is going to pay it shortly after. So to piggyback off of what Eric was just saying, and it's so true. I want to take you back to my managing years. I remember right before the financial crisis of 2008. I had gone through the reports in my system, and I was just the volume of patients that I was seeing on the day-to-day basis was just very like my associates were tired and the revenue wasn't there. So it was volume and the reimbursement structure was just not there. And so I sat down with the owner and we made the decision. We need to shift and we need to decide by pulling the reports and looking at the cash flow and looking at some of those other aspects, which one do we actually, drop, right? And the decision was made. And to Eric's point, a year later, and I'm speaking, I'm the office manager, like just thrown into the battlefield, just, little training and mentorship at the time, but I just had that awareness and drive to just look at the numbers. So I looked at the numbers from the year that I dropped the plan and the following year and the volume of patients that we had seen. And I remember this vividly. We had seen 74 less patients the year after for that same month that I generated the report. And we saw I think it was like a $24,000 increase from the revenue for that month. But the volume and the overhead to treat those 74 patients, you can only imagine. And so short term, the patient feels it. And you ask the question when we don't have a script ready and a patient calls to ask why their plan was dropped, who bears the costs? The patient originally, but the office, if that is the case, if they haven't really taken the time to develop a strategy to first pull up those reports, analyze what's going on, get on the scale and figure out, okay, how we're going to do this, and develop a system and put a training plan in place, then it is going to be one of those things that the patients are going to feel uncertain. They're going to feel that there is inconsistency, or they're going to be confused by the front desk. So they are not going to interpret it as a insurance decision. They are going to interpret it as a trust issue. And that's something that you touched on earlier on, that it's not about dropping an insurance. It's about, we don't get patients, we need to create patients, and that makes the difference, right? So that is why I always tell practices that dropping a PPO is not primarily like an insurance project per se. It's more of a communication project in which everyone needs to see the value and the benefit. The team, I remember the goals and aspirations and the things that I wanted the office to grow, and the reason why I wanted to see those numbers as an office manager to grow, for what's in it for me. Then we need to think about what's in it for the office, but ultimately whoever pays, the patients pay for all of our dreams in the practice and all of our goals, right? So what's in it for the patient, and have we developed enough trust? And based on that trust, putting together like systems in place or scripts that are going to prepare for the transition. Every insurance company, when you send them the letter, they are going to give you 60 days, sometimes 120 days or 30 days. You need to pull the report from that number of patients that are in question and figure out who's on our schedule, who do we need to bring in, who do we need to have a one-on-one conversation with, rather than just, they will hear from the insurance the moment that letter gets into their mailbox with the agent. So role play with your team members, and they need to have a reason why and have the buy-in in order for it to work for the practice's way. Because, like before the patient's phone call happens or the decision takes place, you need to have all of these things, these systems already readily available for the team to execute on.
Maritza, let's get a bit actionable. What is one sentence the front desk can use to avoid sounding defensive?
Defensive, one word. So
Avoid.
avoid.
Yeah.
So things that I always tell offices to avoid is, we are not working with your insurance because your insurance is bad, or the office has decided to drop your insurance because your insurance. One thing that I always tell my doctors is, we have to be mindful that we're dealing with people, and everyone has different companies. We have different purchasing power. Patients have different purchasing power, and there is, and we need to have a sense of how can I say it, honoring the patient themselves. Despite insurance is secondary to care and secondary to the
Okay.
relationship, in my view. And so avoiding things like, oh, your insurance does not pay enough, and I understand that this is one of those things. So it needs to come from the value, the perceived value of the services that you're looking to render to those patients, in contrast to the relationship that you have with the insurance, and how you want to be able to take back control of their care despite or without the control of the insurances involved.
So
So
always
your
focus on
insurance
the
is
care.
bad is one of those things that I hear patients are saying, and everyone, it's not honorable. Every level of work that we do, whether it's an HMO or a PPO policy, my husband, and we have a local union plan, and I care for my care, right? Like the insurance is
Yeah.
secondary for the work that I'm looking to get from some of my providers. And when they make it about the insurance, it is a problem for them. And it's a problem of trust for me, because you're working with my insurance. You're not treating me as an individual. So be very mindful of those things. Is my
Appreciate that,
practical
Maritza.
advice. I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, definitely. It gives
I'm here from the
absolutely. It gives a
perspective
solid
as the
framework.
girl sitting at the front desk and also as a patient. That's the perspective that I want to have everyone walk away with for sure.
Absolutely. Now, Eric, most practices carry 5 to 12 PPO contracts. What share of those plans typically drive the majority of patient volume in your experience?
Yeah, you know, we have conversations a lot at Dental HQ with just like people trying to get out of network and what you just hit on with um, pretty much the first 60, 90 days, very, very important because I don't know that you're necessarily going to want to drop your top two carriers, right? To answer your question, it's like top 2 to 4 carriers. They can drive around 80+% of production. And it might look like your top two, let's just hypothetically, for ease of math, even say that they're like 30%, 30%. So your top two could easily
Mm,
account for 60% of production from insured patients. Um, the, then it trickles down. If you're on the higher side where you have like 10 to 12 carriers, there is a very, very, very good chance that carriers 8 through 12 in that pecking order are giving you next to nothing. You might start to discover that you're not, what we've both already alluded to with kind of tolerating some massive write-offs, but it could be a little bit more, and definitely from the front desk perspective or treatment coordinator perspective, the kind of that administrative burden, right? If claims are going denied and you're having to sit on hold with somebody or explain, the clinician's, decisions like that. That's not something that any practice should be doing. So you do start to see, maybe maybe you're getting slower collections. I already kind of mentioned the EBITDA side of it, but on those plans, again, let's call it like 8 to 12 in that pecking order. They contribute very little like actual patient acquisition. So what we tend to see as we work with practices are out of network practices. They're getting just stronger patient relationships. And I think that's where, whether it's consultative, like just coaching for the front desk, implementing a membership plan, the idea here is always stronger patient relationships. You don't want to be a commodity, right? You want stronger fee realization. You don't want the patient getting second opinions. All of that boils down to the relationship. It's all about the trust that you have with your doctor, with that team. So, it's very attractive, I think, even for the practice, for the team. Their current workday becomes easier and it's definitely more attractive for the doctor, when they're working with patients that want to be there and aren't second guessing them. But, especially again, ready to sell time, I think that it really, really helps out to do an exercise to see, what are you getting out of each of your PPOs? And it can be strictly from a production standpoint, who's contributing the most. You don't necessarily have to look at what I talked about earlier with just that ratio of what reimbursement versus what are they providing, in the network. Just take a look at out of those, let's say 10 to 12 carriers, see who's actually worth sticking with based on what they're giving you. And maybe it's none, right? We don't always know that until we do these exercises. So
Now, Eric, why is patient volume alone not enough to decide which plan matters most?
yeah, the patient volume again, I might be repeating myself quite often because it is so familiar that we hear the same concerns from practices. But you could have very, very high patient volume from a carrier, but if their reimbursement's incredibly low, you really have to weigh that out, right? It doesn't make sense to work 3 times as hard for a third of the money when, like Maritza had said, that maybe you're seeing 10, 20, maybe more percent less patients. And what did you say? It was like
It was
$30,000
like
more
74
production.
patients
Yeah,
less and
Like,
that's 24.
$24,000 more or something like that.
I'm sure for a lot of
Yeah,
people listening that they're sitting there going, well, that's the dream, right? Like less
dream.
patients, better reimbursement,
And more
you
exactly.
know. And that doesn't mean the patient's hurting. You had already mentioned the consumer psychology behind a lot of this too. Patients purchase things that they find value in. That doesn't mean it's the lowest price point, right? It could be better technology. It could be, better manufacturing. It could be a better screw for the implant. It could be a lot of things that, if it's explained properly to the patient, that they might want something a little bit higher priced because maybe the quality is better. Not always a race to the bottom. And we very much try to talk with our customers using the platform about that type of stuff. It's should be based on your fee schedule, and your quality of care. So.
If I can add to that, we're looking for a great experience. And that is, like when we focus on that, on what kind of experience are we giving our patients, it's very powerful because it anchors the entire team and the entire office around the experience, for sure.
Appreciate that. Let's truly focus in on that experience, and let's also appreciate the experience of the admin task. Like Eric just mentioned, if you are running 12 different PPOs, those last 8 to 12 in the pecking order might just be adding on more admin burden more than the profitability factor. So, Maritza, how do you decide between dropping the lowest reimbursing plan first versus the highest volume plan first when cash flow might already be tight? This is a very
So, yeah.
practical question.
So every office has to Eric's point, like the highest utilization plans. And when you look at how they rank in every given office, when I run reports, you have the top five. Out of the top five, there are usually two or three that are the ones that are at the lowest reimbursement, but they're the ones that drive the volume and the revenue, even despite the high write-offs. And so when cash flow is tight and we need to look into the overhead of the practice and the cash flow and the profit margin, then we start with what we can control, right? Like what can we manage and how ready is the team and the practice financially to sustain the transition. So like the lowest reimbursement plans often create like the biggest, like operational burden, and they contribute to, to Eric's point, the least profit, right? So, I say that working with the ones that are not necessarily the highest volume, but the one that has
Hmm.
lower utilization, but also and this is also a topic that I know it's a little off topic, but I work a lot with a lot of the restructure of insurance contracts and negotiations. And when it comes to that, we need to clean house. A lot of times insurances have, like share cost savings models, insurance stacking, and like one contract. And it's just like a maze of all of the things. And so we use the time and all of these reports to analyze and get the communication strategy going for the patient retention process and the marketing systems to be able to reduce the risk internally, because we need to invite the patients to the practice. So there is a component of the marketing strategy that also incorporates the membership plan, right? But we need to, again, prepare for that and make the decision based on not emotion, but based on what we can control and use and do it gradually over time. So like a high volume PPO may eventually just need to be evaluated, but I want the practice to build the confidence first and learn from the smaller transition. And because at the end of the day, like the goal isn't to prove a point to an insurance company, which is, like you sometimes get upset, they keep denying certain things or what have you, or maybe you have a prejudice, over a certain group of people that have or carry a certain insurance company. Where you open also determines the patients that you're going to see. So you should think about where location before you go in. But after, like you are running your practice and you really need to earn the trust of those patients, because the goal is to strengthen the business while protecting the patient
Hmm.
relationships and financial stability of the practice for sure. So
Now,
yes, when
you
cash
mentioned a
flow is
great point
tight,
earlier.
then I start with the small part that I can control and develop the program or like the transition strategy with the team to get into the bigger fish.
To get into the bigger fish, right? And as you mentioned, to not make that decision emotionally, but rather to have it justified by a strong, data-backed, confident plan, right? And that segues perfectly into my next question here for Eric. What replacement math does an owner need to convey notice to a carrier?
Yeah, it's a great question because we've definitely thought about this over Dental HQ, and we have two tools actually that really help out with these types of decision-making processes. But the one very relevant is about, it's we call it our PPO calculator. So it's something that happy to share as a follow-up with everybody, listening. But really, the things that the PPO calculator looks at is or the main point, I should say, is how many patients do you need to retain in any given network to safely drop that PPO? And that could be like 100%, or you might say, well, look, our goal is if we can retain, 80% of the revenue we were making off of this, we know it will come through, within the next 12 months kind of thing. But this little tool that we have, this calculator, it's no more than about a 3-minute exercise. Look at how many patients are currently in your network. And then there's some input questions on UCR related fees, relating to cleanings, exams, x-rays. It could be fluoride, any little additional things you want to include kind of in your cleaning value or your regular hygiene value. And then taking a look at operating costs. So that could obviously be your hygienist, cost of supplies, could be your time if you want to include that. Again, we have some variables in there for you to play around with. But a big part of that is what we've already discussed with the write-offs. So is it 25%, 45% higher? Some of these might answer themselves when you actually get to that write-off question. It's like kind of shocking if you don't already know what some of these write-offs are. But uh, the end result really for the PPO calculator is usually spits out you need to keep somewhere for a higher paying PPO or a higher reimbursing PPO, 25%, all the way up to like 40%, 45%. You don't normally need to keep or retain in your practice as many patients as you might think to safely drop the PPO. And that is truly I drop them today and I don't lose any money tomorrow, right? So that's a great target number to have. But these are all discussions that really I think with us, Ritz is somebody like you that has a more insight on day to day, kind of doings in the practice and how to make up for that. Call it 10% that they're going to leave on the table when they drop a PPO. One thing I do know for sure is that if you don't have another option and you don't know how to talk to your patients about dropping the PPO, it could be a disaster. And it's something that, you already had kind of alluded to it, but any carrier is going to have the letters in the mail as soon as you hit cancel, right? They will notify your patients saying pretty much what a terrible person you are and to go to the dentist down the street because they're the greatest dentist in the world when really they're just a network. So prep is key. We absolutely believe in membership plans as an option regardless of we never say do a membership plan or a PPO, or go PPO in
Mm.
network. It can be a mix, right? And so that's what we always hesitate to say drop them all, but you probably should. That's kind of the dream too, right? Is to like, if you're truly fee for service, I think a lot of those doctors, those practice owners recognize the value of those patients compared to a heavily insured network practice. So.
Now, there's a question inside that the letter in the mail from the insurance company, right? We talked about this very briefly beforehand. How important is it for the practice to be the first one to break the news?
I mean,
Who do you want
that's
to answer this question?
Eric?
yeah, that is number one,
Um,
I think. You
well,
know, that's I will absolutely let you chime in on that as well, but it's getting to your patients first. They're your patients. You know, that's the
Exactly.
relationship. They're not the insurance company's patients. Insurance benefits change year to year depending on the company you're with or not. But you know, if you can position yourself as their dentist, then they're going to choose you over their insurance company. I don't know many people that feel the same way about their healthcare provider and their dentist the same, or and their insurance carrier the same, right? Um, I'll be blunt and say I don't care what benefits we have as long as they're valuable, but I do want to go to somebody I trust when they're, you know, in my mouth here and poking around and all that. I don't want that to change every recall visit. So
To add to that, I just want to ask the question to everyone, right? Like how many of you think that anyone has ever met or dealt with their insurance carrier or anyone that works for the insurance company? And think about how intimate of a relationship and how vulnerable it is for a patient to come into you and sit on your chair and open their mouth. That is the most vulnerable thing that a human being can do. When someone allows you to get into their mouth, one of the most vulnerable things, that is a compromise that you need, a privilege that you have been given. And so, with that in mind, when you are making a business decision and their way of basically receiving care or continuing under your care is going to be somewhat modified, then you, because this patient has entrusted you with one of the most vulnerable parts of their body, their mouth, and their care, it is in your best interest as a, and this is where I think everyone makes the mistake of thinking of the business out like just as the, you know, the schedule, the cash flow, this, that. I mean, we have to take a moment to think back about why are we opening our business. Like, and I always teach my whenever I speak or have conversations with people, I always say stick to your three V's, your vision, your values, and your vibe. Like everything is linked to that, to those three V's in my view. And so now that I have given you the perspective of how important you are to your patient's life, now the letter comes in or you have made the decision of making changes to how you structure your relationship with that patient. You're going to get on the phone, Sally, Sam, whomever is at the front desk that they have already built a relationship with, that knows the value of your work. And it's going to have a conversation with them and say, hey, Mrs. or Mr. Smith, I just want to give you, make you aware that our practice is going through a revision. And it seems like we are going to make some changes that may affect. And I would like to have a conversation with you in regards to that. So, and it could be, you know, as of this date or that day, we're going to make the following changes. Now, this is how you can continue to, you know, to continue your care because you know how valuable you are to us. And again, this is stuff that, you know, I'm just basically throwing it out there, but I've gone through this process with my clients and with students and personally myself because I care for my patient. And so I'm going to be the first to get on the phone and say, hey, Laura, you know, just so you know, this is going to happen. So expect this. But here's the thing. Insurance is secondary to care. You're still welcome to continue to come to the practice. We've already completed X, Y, and Z work and or based on the work that we're doing, we have this treatment plan pending. If you want to use your insurance, we have a 60-day period after that day because you know this information. Before you do the research, before you drop the plan, you already know ahead of time what type of impact or the timeline and whether or not the patient is in active treatment or recare treatment. To Eric's point, every office has a hourly overhead. And so you want to make sure that you are like once you drop the plan for their recare visits, you are still able to meet that hourly like overhead. But you are the one that reaches out to the patient first. I mean, there is no question about it. And then you let them know that ignore that letter because we are
Yeah.
still going to honor you and we still look forward to seeing you in such and such day. And so I have a pipeline or a funnel that I follow. First is the phone call. And if they're scheduled to come to the office, then when you come in, we're going to sit down and have a conversation about it. Then we do an email as well. And we send them a physical letter just to let them know and get ahead of the insurance company. So that's the workflow, or at least
Oh,
what I
wow.
follow.
Thank you so Oh, that's great, Maritza. And yeah, I think Eric, when you mentioned positioning yourself as their dentist, instead of letting all this insurance noise get in the way of things, at the end of the day, like you mentioned, Maritza, people really come to the dentist and they allow themselves to be vulnerable, right? So the practice really has that privilege, that intimate privilege. And it's almost their responsibility to take care of that relationship and let them know you're going to be okay. You know, this is just uh, a small change that is happening within the practice, but we got you covered for the next 60 days, and this is how we are going to offboard you if that's the way. But take that responsibility because your patients deserve it, and so do you. We're going to take a quick pause here. We have arrived at the mid session of our wonderful conversation, and I have something really exciting to share with everyone here. So, and I love it when my PC freezes up for me. Critical point, but such as so. We have been talking about, and oh, there we go. Yeah. So we have been talking about building something genuinely valuable, a framework for understanding the numbers, the patient risks, and the team readiness behind the PPO exit. There is one more layer that'll make all of this land. So right now, while we're talking, someone in your market is searching for a dentist they can trust. Another patient is searching for the exact treatment your practice offers. Another is trying to decide whether your office looks credible enough to call. So, the ultimate question here is when those patients search, does your practice show up and does it give them the enough confidence to book? That is where echo marketing comes in. Echo helps dental practice owners strengthen visibility across Google search, AI search visibility, and local trust signals so online interest can become booked appointments. Tonight, as a gift for being here, Equa is offering everyone a complimentary practice growth session. A transition readiness audit built specifically for dental practice owners. It's usually valued at $900, completely complimentary for you tonight. So here are some things that you are going to walk away with. A clear read on where your practice value sits today, the patient retention gaps that may be eroding your worth, and then an online trust audit a smart buyer would run anyway, and a growth blueprint for before, during, and after the handoff. So go ahead and scan that QR code on your screen right there, or else you can check the chat for direct. It'll take less than a minute to book. You're just reserving your spot. And what do you need to do for this meeting? Well, just enter in your website, your location of the practice, and a few other key information. And of course, that's it. All the heavy lifting will be done by the marketing analyst at Equa, and they'll be ready for you on the call. So it's the next layer that'll help find and trust the model that you're building. So go ahead and grab that link now, um, and we will come back to the transition sequence. Right. Now we're going to move into a bit of a AMA, Ask Me Anything. segment here. Few ways you can participate. You can either raise your hand and I will just unmute and speak live, ask your question, or else go ahead, type it into the chat or the Q&A box. The Q&A box is very helpful to keep things nice and neat, but nevertheless, it's not an issue at all if you were to use the chat. So go ahead and do that. While you do get warmed up, I had a couple of registrant questions that I would like to get some reflection from our panelists. So here we go. We had Eric ask us if someone purchases an existing practice with another dentist as a partner, how should they evaluate PPO contracts before they inherit the same problems? Hmm. Eric, would you like to start us off on this?
I definitely can. And Maritza probably has a lot more experience than I do with something like this. But the really nice thing that I've been fortunate enough to be friends with Dr. Brett Wells for quite a while. He was also the founder of Dental HQ. And so we're very much a dental-driven mindset type company. Brett has 8 locations now, and of course has done some acquisitions, has had partnerships, all of that. I've been de facto consultant, just from listening to all of this type of stuff that he's gone through. Um, it can't be an emotional thing, right? Like there comes a time when you're looking at any practice where it is a numbers game. So emotion has to go aside. And I know that's tough for any current practice owner or homeowner, right? It's like we attach ourselves to all kinds of different things, but you have to have those difficult discussions based on analytics. KPIs are why, 7 figure, some 8 figure for that matter, practices exist. People follow systems and processes, and when you are bringing on a partner or expanding, those kinds of conversations are not personal, right? They're just they're business decisions. Now a little tie-in here to membership plans that I did learn from Brett and his kind of journey in DSO that he's forming. He has always found that implementing a membership plan, or I don't want to necessarily single it out to something like that, but coming into a practice as a new doctor is great time to offer something a little different, right? So maybe it's a specialty, sleep apnea that you've taken a lot of classes on, or maybe you're very much into cosmetic side of things, a TMJ Botox type angle. But Brett had definitely found that membership plans kind of gave peace of mind to a lot of the patients that he was coming in saying, "Look, I'm here for all of you, and for those that don't have insurance, I even have something for you." And so coming in as a practice owner or a partner for that matter and offering up your skill set, you're a different person, you're a different doctor, it's welcome. It's something that I think any practice owner would yeah, they'd like to have that conversation. And for me, if you can take an emotional side out of it, looking at data analytics shows you care. That is something that I truly believe that if you didn't care, then you would just go with the flow and say, I'm just here to drill some teeth and get my paycheck and go home. And if you care more about the practice, you're going to want to know these things. So I will hand it over to a much more experienced person on the panel, but those are definitely some of the things I've just noticed over the years. So
I couldn't agree with you more. And so rephrase the question one more time. So are we speaking about an acquisition or a merger? Like
If
we have,
someone is purchasing, yeah, so Eric Bernstein has asked if someone is purchasing an existing practice with another
okay,
dentist as a partner,
okay.
how should they evaluate PPO contracts before they inherit the same problems?
Oof, that is, yes. So I'll give you the perfect example. This is a slow transition, I should say. The owner or the seller is going to be phasing out. but they are going to remain partners for a period of time post, the transfer of ownership and so on. But that is the best time, to Eric's point, because you're bringing in a lot of times when you have a dentist, either there is growth and or they want to be able to pivot and restructure and do some things that are new. And when you're bringing in new ideas, new technology, new services, those are the things that need to be bundled up and you're adding more value. And with the value comes more costs. And then you need to revise how you're going to be compensated for the added value. And this is where, if you're doing a transfer of ownership and you're, changing the tax ID, or you're just having a new contract, or a new entity being set up, then that is a perfect opportunity to renegotiate your compensation, number one, and or reduce your dependency and do what we and Eric have been speaking about, so that you can start at a new sort of like start fresh. It is a cash flow. The numbers always tell the story. There is not the trust component yet for you as the new as the new dentists coming in, but then you definitely do have the opportunity, and you need to basically restructure your contracts, because there are a lot of ways in which you can be. 25 years ago, when I started my career in dentistry, like, you would be giving the list of PPO plans and you just go down the list and say, okay, I need to sign up with Aetna, and you would just go in alphabetical order. The insurances have, instead of competing with each other, they're just creating some form of like lease partnership agreements, and it's a maze, right? And it's just very confusing. But then strategic contracting comes and helps you. And I'll give you the perfect example, because I know we're pressed for time and I can talk about this for like ever. But to give you a perfect example, I'm right now I'm working with a client who's acquiring a practice, and we reviewed the seller's fees, private fees. And be careful out there, a lot of sellers or dentists are a fee-for-service practice, but then in some instances, their fees are below the 40th percentile for their area. And so they're really outdated. And you need to bring those fees up to date. Private fees, the utilization, like when we are trying to renegotiate fees with the insurance companies directly in order to not have such a drastic change, and then build our strategy, exit strategy, and or the marketing to attract and compensate for those new patients that are going to be our new cash paying patients through the membership plans. To maintain that level and that balance, we need to inherit some of the insurances that were pre-existent. But a lot of times it's just difficult because the seller's fees are so outdated, and they're billing these really outdated fees to the insurance company. So they're saying, based on the utilization, you're billing us $40 for a periodic evaluation. 36 is like, 60% of those fees. So that's a pretty good, like, you don't have that much of a write-off. And it's because their fees privately are so low. So Eric, I would say 150%, you want to be able to restructure the contracts to make it where you gain equity within the practice as the new owner from the compensation structure of the former, owner or partner. Hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maritza and Eric. Eric Bernstein, we really do hope that you found what you were looking for, or at least the starting place for your conversation. And then we got another registrant question from one Sharon Jordan. Sharon asks, how do you train the receptionist to answer patient questions when the practice is dropping or changing PPO? So I think we briefly touched on this earlier. Maritza, do you have anything else to add on to that?
Say the end of the question again.
Yeah. How do you train the receptionist to answer patient questions when the practice is dropping or changing a PPO?
That comes back to the perceived value of that individual. I kid you not, sometimes I go into practices, and the personal financial philosophy that we hold sometimes we bring with us to our businesses. And so your employee needs to have buy-in first and foremost. They need to believe and understand that the value that you provide, it is important enough for you to make this decision and trust that the patients are going to value that relationship and just find ways to make it where the patients are not being turned away. Okay, that's the key component of it. The training is not a script, it's a mindset. And the mindset comes from
Mm.
how they perceive you as a product or service, you as a dentist, and
Mm.
how they project that onto the patient with a strategy. Because remember, you're not just dropping the insurance without a game plan. You have your membership plan, you have like your promotional services, and you're going to package that in a way that makes it where you plan it with enough time and support to the patient that they're going to just continue to come to their appointment and do the initial payment for their membership plan and no worries about insurances or eligibility or what have you. So you basically have to package it and present it to the patient as an opportunity to just focus on the relationship and have the insurance sort of like fired.
Great. That mindset shift. It's not very easy to do, is it now?
It's not, because we are insurance oriented. Patients are. And when we start our positions sitting at the front desk, we are afraid of making mistakes. And so we take a lot of the like authenticity of building that relationship with the patients because we are afraid of making financial, administrative, PPO related mistakes. And so like having as an owner the leadership and giving them a sense of ownership in the process and what is there to gain for everyone. Because remember, they're going to be, if we are able to transfer and do this many patients, maybe perhaps if we look at the numbers like I did, right? Like a year later, we're going to go back and review and monitor, and then we're all in this, right? So how can this serve you as my counter partner at the front desk or administrative person, to make it all work for everyone? Basically, it's a team effort.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Maritza.
Sure.
And of course, to our registrants who had asked those questions, thank you so much for really engaging with us. And of course, that just helps everyone in the community to really understand the current pain points and how to tackle them effectively. So my next question is to you, Eric, and this is regarding the 6 month strategy decision, right? So after 6 months post-exit of a PPO plan, how does an owner decide whether to hold the current fee-for-service model or adjust the strategy with remaining PPO contracts? What are we thinking about here?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of questions that you're going to kind of ask yourself, and
This
then
is
and a little
definitely,
evaluation,
yeah.
right? So, post 6 months, I mean, is the practice, did it stabilize, right? Like if you were a little bit off, proceeding or the net collections versus the pre-exit collections, it's kind of like, are you somewhere in the same ballpark? Or to Maritza's point about her story earlier, in her own practice, did it improve? Did the profitability improve at least? And I think the one thing that we haven't talked about as much, and it's a little bit more in the weeds, is like, did the right patients stay? And what I mean by that is when you're looking at, we've talked about letters going out, or just kind of I guess that internal alignment of how are you going to handle this transition. It's not a bad idea to segment your patients into buckets based on, are they like a hygiene only patient? Are they a family? Are they more high value treatment patient, or like a perio patient that just, maybe they come in 3, 4 times a year regardless, right? So these are all little things to look at. And I think that we do stop, or the practice should stop looking at patient count, and more into the, are we healthier with fewer patients and that kind of higher realization, or do you need selective PPO participation, right? I think the evaluation side something that we've actually had discussions about lately. I kind of already mentioned the net collection side, but the hygiene schedule strength, I think hygiene scheduling is probably one of the easiest metrics to look at of 6 to 8 weeks out. Is it pretty much the same? How's that recare looking from those segmented buckets of patients? Did one drop over the other? The treatment acceptance trends, it's like, did the value increase? If you had a $1,200 treatment plan value, is it now at 1,500? Or you had a 65% case acceptance rate and now you're at an 80, right? Because the patients are more committed to you, they're not getting second opinions. All of these things are just things to look at or to evaluate. But that's a pretty big one. And one of the things that we do, and I mentioned we have a couple of tools, resources for our customers or prospective customers, to look at their kind of acquisition quality. So that new patient comes in, or even existing patient, it's like, are they coming in 2 times per year? Or do you think that you've got a great set of uninsured patients that's really on average coming in every 11 to 15 months, right? So all of those types of metrics you need to look at. Are you getting referrals from your current patients versus new patient special shoppers, right? Someone that clicked on a Google ad and said, great, I can get my teeth cleaned for 99 bucks. Not saying they're a waste of your time, but like that kind of lead generation isn't really the ideal patient you're looking for, right? The membership plan type patient where cancellations and no-shows go down, rent retention stays well above 90% for the most part. Case acceptance is usually much higher, definitely than an uninsured patient, a typical one. But a good membership plan usually will have a higher case acceptance rate on treatment plans than even your insured patients. These people are buying into their own oral health care and they're doing it with you. So we say more of the ideal patient, but that's something that if you do have a membership plan or are looking to adopt one, that's a metric to look at as well, 6 months down the road. Our goal for any practice, one operatory, 10 ops, minimum of 10 members per month. That right there, you're golden. You are going to see a six-figure revenue increase within 12 months based on your membership plan alone. And that's going to be based on that patient paying you for 2 cleanings per year, actually coming in for them too. But it's just a more predictable schedule you're getting, or a more consistent schedule you're getting that patient on. And then, typically it's going to lead to something down the road. Might be something as simple as a filling, could be the crown or higher, right? So a membership plan adoption rate, something to take a look at. And I think the last piece, at least the discussions we typically have, are about what remaining PPOs do you have? So in that initial uh, transition, let's just say we were going based on like 10 PPOs. Let's say you dropped 5 of them. Didn't make sense at all. Then you start to look at number 3 and 4, or 3, 4, and 5. Can you take your current model and kind of scale it or replicate the process to drop, PPOs 3, 4, and 5? Maybe you still keep 1 and 2, right? So these are all, I'm not trying to be kind of in the weeds as possible, but some of them it's like I don't want to dissuade anybody from doing anything, but there is quite a bit to look at. We have these conversations. Maritza much smarter about this and experienced than we are, but there's a lot of crossover. We set out to more or less hone in on increasing patient care in the community for patients who didn't think it was affordable to see a dentist. They just had a perception of cost was too high. But then you show them a membership plan with like a monthly or an annual cost. It's not that expensive for hygiene, right? And so getting them to come see you is step one. But all of these things is what we should be taking a look at 6 months down the road. And I think that our success team does a great job with helping these practices transition from dropping one PPO to, all of them. It's something that we get a lot of questions about, and I think kind of fortunate to have learned a lot about it across the years. So.
Right. Appreciate that, Eric. What a comprehensive answer. And we have arrived at the top of the hour here. So before we wrap up, I do want to get a quick golden nugget, perhaps the key takeaway from our discussion here. Maritza, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think that to Eric's point, the future belongs to practices who own their patient relationships, not the practices that outsource the relationship, outsource it to the front desk, outsource it to the insurance companies, outsource it to their marketing companies. It is, you need to own your patient relationship, and the future will be yours.
Right on. Eric, how about you, sir?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think that it is all about value and that trust, that relationship. So, we obviously, I believe very much in membership plans as the vehicle to get that type of patient. It's something that don't be scared to charge your full fees. I would say that that's actually one little nugget I'd like to pass along for anybody currently running their own membership plan, self-managing it. We typically see a huge discount off of the hygiene even, and we just don't approach things that way. Like I just mentioned, hygiene isn't that expensive when you break it down into monthly or even an annual rate. Mostly under $600, right, for annual fees. It's don't be scared to know your value and to charge your full fees because patients will pay it. They will see the value in you, your team, and it's a very important part of our overall health. We all know that, right? To have good oral health. So I say full fees on a membership plan. Make sure Maritza does everything else for you. So,
For sure.
Amazing. Amazing. Uh, right. Now, as we begin to wrap up here, I do want to make a quick one last reminder. Our sponsor of the event, Echo Marketing, giving away a complimentary marketing strategy meeting for our registrants here. And when patients in your city search for the treatments that you offer, make sure that your practice is the first one that shows up as the trusted choice. So the link is in the chat one last time. And of course, you can go ahead and scan that QR code on your screen in a minute. And with that being said, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Eric and Maritza for your wonderful insights here tonight. It's much appreciated. And for our attendees who participated in the conversation, um, it's much appreciated. And of course, as you're exiting this webinar, you will get a quick feedback survey that'll pop up on a new browser tab. Please do take 30 seconds to fill that out because it'll help us bring even better events for you in the future. With that being said, thank you so much for everyone joining in. It has been my pleasure hosting this session for you on behalf of the Thriving Dentist. And until the next expert panel, take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Everyone, have a good night.
thank you guys.
Have a good night. Absolutely.